Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 73 of Get Out of Rap. Today, I'm joined by David Preece from QStory. And David's been involved in contact centers since 1996 and planning since 1998. We're going to cover some topics that actually people have been asking for more of. So I'm really looking forward to this. And I'm also pleased that there's someone else on the podcast with also a badger-like beard. There hasn't been enough representation of beards with white bits at the front. So you've got two of us today. David, thanks very much for coming on. Welcome.
Oh, no problem, Martin. Thanks for having me on, and my beard as well.
Yeah, yours is fuller and lusher than mine, I would say.
Scruffier, I think the word you're looking for is. Yeah, thank you very much.
No, it's great to have you on. I think you're very well known in the industry, and like I say, these are topics where I get a lot of messages from people saying, when are you going to cover kind of planning and do some more episodes on that? Because we've done a few, but probably not as many as warrants, and it's a really interesting time for that area now. So really pleased to have you here.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it is. It's a really difficult but fascinating time for people involved in planning. They've got lots of challenges that they've never ever considered that they'd ever face.
And you, before we sort of touch on those challenges and how people, and you can share tips about how people might turn them challenges into actually big wins. So can you just talk me through your background? How have you got to this point here? What's your journey been?
Well, I think like everybody else involved in planning, I just sort of fell into the tar pit that is contact center planning. You look to get away from the phones. What I did by then to get off the phones was to become a trainer and a training manager, and then I eventually became what was called a call center controller for Ladbrokes Telebetting several years ago, and that introduced me to the world of having to produce a schedule for people and match up supply and demand. And I was looking at the stuff that they were doing and the difficulty in doing the forecasts. And suddenly I realized I was actually reasonably good at this. And, you know, we went from being fairly disorganized to having like a really good understanding of what our drivers were. And coming up with like a working rotational schedule pattern just using Excel. And then that was it, really. Once I discovered after years, so bear in mind, I was about 26, 27 at that time. So after years and years of not being good at things, to suddenly find something that felt quite natural to me, it was obviously going to be my career really from now on in. So then I've done pretty much everything within planning. I've done capacity planning, I've been forecasting, I've done real-time management, and then I moved into the wonderful world of the vendor and ended up at QStory. Took 2 years out to go and work for the forum, the planner forum, which was a job I always really wanted. And then the call of intraday automation got me, and I felt like I really needed to come back and finish what I'd started. So here I am.
Now you're at QStory.
I am, yes. So fantastic little company. You know, we're the mouse that rode, really. We're only little, but we're very, very powerful. And we're moving right the way through the market. We're a big disruptor for the big players in the market. It's just a fabulous place to be at the moment.
That's great. I just want to go back to, so you started on the phones.
Yeah.
And like to get off the phones went in, and I love how everyone I speak to, of the vast majority that have been in contact centers, have kind of had this. It's not always a seamless journey, but the kind of you've been on the phones. I think everyone has a shelf life for that kind of activity, unless things change or you maybe change your hours or whatever. Then you went training to planning is quite a strange. It doesn't feel like a natural move. How did that happen?
Well, I went, to be honest, I skipped a bit there. I went from training and then managing somebody else who was training into being a team leader at
Right.
Air Miles in what was the flight sales department there. and then therefore managing people. I then got into that call center controller role, and it was really a combination of finding out I was good at that and also being fed up of managing people. Wonderful things, but it was when the excuses for bad performance or whatever started to clock round, and you went, "No, I've heard this one before." It suddenly it was time for me to move away from managing other people and actually sort of managing what they did in blocks during the day.
And then when you got into the whole world of planning, did you have to self-learn? How did you do that? How did you become? So you find that you have a natural tendency for it, right? And you enjoy it. And then maybe it unlocks this kind of like, I've forgotten the kind of the way that the graph goes, but you suddenly know now what you don't know, and then you're trying to fill that gap. How did you do that?
A lot of research, a lot of trial and error, and then in the early 2000s, signing up with the Professional Planning Forum and attending a lot of their events. And I think pretty early on in one of those, just as I was sort of, feeling for my expertise, I met Phil Anderson at an event, and he helped me a lot over the years. But it was just, I'm quite a self-starter, so it was just a desire to find out how to use this wonderful thing called Excel and how I could do it better. I remember learning about a function called sum product, and thought only Christmases had come up once. That's how geeky I am. That's how appallingly boring I am. But yeah, just constantly researching and just looking for different ways of doing things. I'm still doing that now. I'm still looking for people who are experts, who've got ideas about different ways of doing things. I've always wanted to sort of challenge that. It's always the way we've done it. That is the way that we've always done it around here. I can't stand that type of thinking. So it's just better if we can get out there and find a new normal, which is a horrible phrase, isn't it? Everybody, but that new way of doing things is always going to excite.
Do you? I mean, I like you. You can tell you're passionate about it, and I love just the idea of a younger you just going out and saying, right, I want to know more. I want to know more. I often think the world you're in, from looking at the whole contact center, you've got, it's much like kind of the military, right? We've got all of these different intakes coming in who are the future sergeants, engineers, pilots, whatever. I always felt wherever I'd been that maybe planning didn't do enough self-promotion, didn't do enough, maybe trying to find out amongst the workforce the type of people who would absolutely love it, and give them that kind of pitch and say, if you do want to come off the phones, you don't just have to go either staying in the vertical of ops or go into training or going to QA. There's actually, this is a nice place to be. What would you pitch to people, and also what would you be looking for? What are some of the skills and behaviors that people would need, do you think, or that would lend itself to having the same sort of career success that you've had?
I think I'll start with that one, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think over the years when I was working, what people thought they needed to look for in an analyst was somebody who was extremely numerate. So, you can ask, again, I'll refer to Phil Anderson. You can ask him. He was asked to do something because he was pretty nifty at Excel. And I think the very, very best analysts I've worked with are fairly numerate, but they let the technology do that for them. What they are is amazing communicators, and I think that's the biggest mistake that planning makes, and hopefully that's being sort of resolved now. We want to bring it into the realm that what you're doing is you're an analyst and a translator, so you can have a look at the numbers, but actually translating that into a language that non-analytical people can understand. That's the skill about being an analyst. In terms of how I pitch it, That's a really, really interesting question, and it's a really difficult one. I'd like to put together one of those adverts that like the army do, you know, where it's all about adventure and travel.
Yeah, see the
Glamour.
world.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that it really works like that in planning, but I'm also not entirely sure it works that way in the military either. I suppose the thing that ties them both together is you're both there to be shot at. Yeah, it's both a high risk environment for everybody, really, especially for your ego in planning. But I think one of the most memorable things I've ever heard somebody say when they were talking to somebody on the phones was, instead of moaning about what your schedules are like and the fact that you're always busy, come and make a difference. Come and find out a different way of doing it. Come and challenge the way that we do these things. So maybe that's the pitch.
Yeah, I love that.
Not moaning.
I love that. I think back to my career heading up ops teams, kind of team leader, then a manager, then above, and my interactions with planning. The ones I preferred, that I've got good. Well, I have good relationships with everyone, but the ones that I really felt we were a team, an extended team, were the ones that didn't just say no. So if I went, right, here's what I want to do, I want to, and I could see people getting ready sometimes to say, let's say no. I would be like, I want to take the whole sales floor off at the same time, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, rather than just no. It was all the people that would just had a different way of thinking was, well, that can't happen. I tell you how we could do something that or they would say, what are you trying to achieve?
Yeah.
What is it that you want? Get more information and then work out a solution. I love that, having that kind of mentality, rather than just going, oh God. There was a little bit of that, I'm sure, where here he comes, what does he want now?
But that's the thing, isn't it? In the end of the day, the planet is there to serve the business and serve its customers and serve, you know, as one of their customers. You would, if a customer came over to you and asked you a question, you wouldn't automatically say no. So why should a planet say no to you? Taking everybody offline at the same time, yeah, I'd be looking to find out clarity. If we can't do that, what's the next best option that you've got available? Or, you know, here's some steps that you'd need to take. You'd need to put a message out, you know, on the IVR. You'd have to maybe draft in another department to take really easy calls, and then ask you know, is your desire to take everybody offline stronger than the work that we as a whole group will have to do to sort of mitigate against it? And we'll come up with a solution. The idea is, the way I always look at it is, the operation, they're going to do it anyway. Yeah. And I think all it is it's trying to find the best way to do it, you know. And and I'm sure you've encountered people in your career as well, where it's like, well, yeah, I know they said no, but I'm gonna take people off in groups of 12, and you know, we'll just see what happens. And then the planning team have lost any sort of control over it as well. So it's kind of counterproductive for them.
Yeah. Now we had there was quite a lot of things we could have talked about. One of the things I want to start with is some of the words actually that have come into our vocabulary over the last 18 months. One of those being hybrid workforce, right? So businesses going to face the challenge of working with them, because you said at the outset how the last 18 months has probably been more challenging for people in planning and workforce management than any other time. But now that this hybrid is here to stay, what is the advice around meeting that challenge and actually turning it into a positive?
Yeah, well, my personal viewpoint is that it's a positive anyway, because the work, you know, it opens up so many different things for your workforce, as long as you're thinking about what your definition of hybrid is. So when the pandemic first started, people were talking about, oh, I'll take a hybrid approach. I was of the opinion that, you know, the most successful way to do that would be to have people who are dedicated to working from home and people who are dedicated to working for the office, and finding your split between the two. But it turns out that a lot of people I was speaking to, their definition of it was they were going to have people working a fixed number of hours in the office and a fixed number of hours at home. So there are different ways and means to do that. But as I said, I think it's actually a positive for the whole work-life balance thing, as long as we get that right. And the key for me is it's not really in the world of planning, it's in the world of operations. It's how are you going to protect people's work-life balance? Because when you work from home, I can see you work from home, you do tend to have slight blurred lines around when you start and when you finish. You'll suddenly end up working a longer day. We've got to make sure that we're not just exploiting people's circumstances to get some additional flexibility out of them and some additional work. As long as we're communicating directly with those people as well, and as long as we can replicate most of the things the good things that they get out of working from the office, so that they've still got an idea that they feel like they're working within a team, that they're still receiving regular communications, they still feel that they've got a direct line into you as their manager. And also that we're open to the fact that maybe, hybrid, just like working in an office 5 days a week, it might not work all the time for everyone. And, as long as you've got that sort of plan that you go, okay, well, you can come up but work in the office full time for 6 weeks and see how that goes. As long as you've got that sort of flexibility in there, I can't see how it can go wrong really for everyone.
I love that. I love that thought then. I hadn't even thought about that, of actually making sure that operations don't, I guess, kind of get mission creep. So if there's, let's say we've all been in this position, you need overtime for different reasons. Are there people out there having conversations going, well, you can do an extra half hour, you're at home, so it's not like you have to go home, or I'm stopping you from going home, you're home, so just do an extra half hour. I hadn't even really considered that is something we have to be mindful of, especially with, I know there's been a lot of surveys and reports that we're working longer hours now that we're at home. And I'm pretty sure across the board, everyone's sickness has gone down. Maybe, I think attrition numbers are roughly still the same, but definitely short-term absence where I work, we've seen it drop drastically in this period. So that's a really interesting point that you make. And I guess there's an extent to which planning can be the eyes and ears, that you guys really are the first ones that can start seeing some early warning signs, or be the ones to bring those considerations into the conversation, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think in terms of, I think it probably predates planning as well, because it's about the policy and it's about the aim of the business initially, isn't it? So if the policy is that that's acceptable and people do it, we'll be the first people to see the impact of it. So we'll be able to understand that, attrition is creeping up, or short-term absence is creeping up, or just productivity is going down because people are spending more time in, not getting out of wrap. Yeah, so I suppose we'd be the first key indicators of that. But I think on the whole, what we just need to do is the business needs to think about what it wants to achieve and actually think about its policies beyond, prevention is better than cure, really, isn't it? So if we can make sure that everybody knows it's just not cool to encourage somebody to work an extra half hour all the time. There are systems out there at the moment that can really keep an eye on how many hours people are working each week. And contact centers are famous for just collecting loads and loads of data, aren't they? So let's use that data for good rather than evil purposes. Let's actually, get people looking at the data about, well, Jimmy has worked far too many hours and it's affecting his performance and therefore his health as well.
In your community, in your sort of sphere of excellence, what have there been any surprises from the pandemic, or has there been anything that you thought at the outset, this is going to really challenge us, and it hasn't, or vice versa? How has it been for you?
For me, talking to other people in planning teams, what astonished me about the pandemic was how quickly businesses moved to a home working model. Years and years and years of maybe men, talking about that and fighting the good fight and coming up with a lot of resistance. You had businesses moving 2,000 or 3,000 people out in 3 weeks, which is absolutely incredible. I mean, just, bravo. And the other thing that really surprised me for the good was about how important, the high level of importance that was placed on the mental health and well-being of people that they moved. My big fear was that in all of that rumpus just to get people home, people wouldn't, they'd forget that these were people, and they'd think about them as being staff coverage or, that famous power of one presentation. There'd be that one that's in there. But no, a lot of businesses worked really, really hard to make sure that they had like water cooler sessions, and just meetings, just at least once or twice a week, where you were actually banned from talking about work. It was just an opportunity to talk about, to just be friends and have the chats that you would do over the dividers in the office. That was superb to see. And I think another thing that surprised me was how quickly some organizations drew their particular line in the sand. About 3 weeks into it, the pandemic, I was working at the forum, and we did a webinar about COVID-19. And one organization declared during that session, yeah, that's it, we've made our mind up now, we're just moving to a home working model. That's it, we're not going to work in any offices. And it was like, blimey, that's quick. That's
3 weeks in.
Yeah, because you've no idea what the long-term effects are, because they'd seen productivity go up, they'd seen non-COVID related sickness or furloughs, they'd seen people who were left, there was hardly any absence. And it's very easy to go, well, that's happening now, and that's because people are working from home. But we had a full-on lockdown, nobody had anything else to do, people were worried about being made furloughed, losing their jobs perhaps, so they were probably more focused on staying in work. But also, and if we're all honest, we'll all probably agree this, it was slightly exciting, because we've never been in that situation before. Suddenly people were working from home and going, oh God, this is great, isn't it? So it was a matter of time before that was going to sort of fall back into abeyance, I felt. So I did think that was a bold move by that particular company, probably one that they're looking back on now and regretting.
Well, I wonder, I think just talking to you, I think it's already come across how important workforce engagement is, but also I guess the other thing is being flexible and agile, and not being so stringently dictated to one set of work, one way of working that you can't amend. Because like you say, that feels like 5 years ago, doesn't it? Just how you explained that kind of lockdown one, where we are now, is very, very different. I don't even know what you'd call this current
lockdown 26.
Lockdown, but not lockdown. It's kind of do what you want, and everyone's a bit confused. That kind of, you touched on it then about kind of mental health and making sure people are still trying to engender, still have that team ethos and sense of community. And these aren't things that you would naturally say would be top of the agenda for planning teams, but that's really important to you, and certainly for you guys at QStory as well, isn't it?
Without a doubt, yeah. I mean, one part of like intraday automation software, but one thing that we're very, very keen on is being able to engage with the workforce. So it's about making tools available to people, just generally, and even using the tools that are available at your disposal now. It's about using them creatively and making sure that you're communicating with people remotely. So I think it was probably always the case in a place that I worked in Manchester a few years ago, whereby the people who sat immediately around the real-time team had a fantastic relationship with them. Anybody on a floor above, below, or over the road in another office, they were finding it more difficult for them to communicate with, because face-to-face communication was king. Then you'd run over and talk to somebody. obviously we can't replicate that. We can't have people going all over the country. So it's been a real challenge for people in planning to make sure that they can engage with people, because as you put your finger on it really before about the fact that we're the first people who see these things and see the possible effects downstream of all of the impacts of these. So it's vital that we're able to sort of communicate with people and get a sense of how what we're doing is affecting them and their performance, because it's only going to affect our bottom line in the end of the day. If we're working people the wrong way, they're going to find ways to get the shifts that they want. They're going to find ways to get the rests that they need. They're gonna walk away and find another company who are much more prepared to help them and to focus on their sort of development and their mental health than you are.
I love that.
Absolutely vital.
I'm going to ask now some obvious questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question, is there? So
none at all. Some stupid answers as you're about to find.
What is intraday automation?
So intraday automation is a piece of software that will look to automate all the mundane tasks that real-time teams do on a day-to-day basis. So if somebody moves their break, or if somebody wants to do a shift swap, then there's a lot of communication with regards to that. A team leader or an agent themselves talking to real time. They get told no, they go and escalate it to somebody, it goes up the chain, there's 20 or 30 emails about it. And then in the end of the day, somebody has to manually change those schedules in the WFM system. And none of that work adds any value at all. It's pain, it's annoying, and it's deflecting and diverting people away from something which could really be called analysis about what's going on. So intraday automation software just takes all of that away. So it will enable you to, depending on which system you use, either follow a set of rules or allow your system to make some recommendations, some intelligent recommendations for how you redeploy people, and then it automate all that mundane task. So a really good example is, making a recommendation to move 60 people from phone to asynchronous messaging. And being able to change their telephony skills so that they're not going to take any phone calls again, and updating their schedules to make sure that they're still in adherence, and that we can sort of monitor what they're doing. So it does a really wide-ranging thing which can help team leaders, it can help your planning team. It can also really help your analysts, your agents as well, because they can interact with that piece of software, make requests for something. They don't have to wait for permission. They'll get a yes or no answer. And maybe in a few percent of that, they escalate it and something manually gets done. But most of the time, we'll be able to give them an instant response, yes or no, one way or the other.
And it's just removing people work in the chain then, just kind of, because they're tasks that happen all the time, the things you just said then, I want to change my shift, I want to change my break, I want to change my lunch. They're happening every single day, whether we're in a contact center or at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we spoke to one company once, and they were saying on average in a month, they had 8,000 communications into their real-time team from advisors and from the team leader population.
Wow.
Just to make changes to schedules. Now, that's not 8,000 individual changes. Maybe that's 1,000 of them, and there's 8 reminders. We've never really found that out. But a month after,
you've got a team of 20.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just ridiculous. In the end of the day, it's stuff that needs to be done because we need to keep a handle on what people are actually doing. But it's not adding any value. And what we've always found when we've been talking to people is there's a whole host of people out there who are laboring under a job title of real-time analyst or intraday analyst, and they're not doing a single piece of analysis. They're doing diary management for team leaders. They're doing admin tasks. Some people are even doing facilities work simply because they can't find anywhere else for it to go. And the idea is that if we can take all that mundane stuff out, you can actually start to analyze. There's so much data, being able to go back to your operational managers and say, do you know that your team's productivity was affected by A, B, C, D, and E? And if we make these changes, we can resolve that. That's really adding value to the business rather than changing Jimmy's break from 3 o'clock to 3:15.
It's a really good point, because it's, as you say, that's an administrative task rather than analysis that should lend itself to making operational changes for the better.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. That's what we want people to be doing in that circumstance, don't we? You don't want a forecaster to sort of stop their technical understanding about drivers just to tick a box or make a change in the system. Everything that a forecaster does has got to add value to the whole process. So why not the real-time people as well?
I have another question that's kind of always been in the back of my mind as I read about more and more how, if you think about the future, gig economy, people having loads more jobs with different companies, and they kind of jump in and do a bit of work here, a bit of work there. I think, like a lot of people who are a bit long in the tooth like us, my best performers were always part-time. I think it just some of our work lends itself to focused activity for a couple of hours and then go and do something else. If you sort of think about this way of working that's coming with younger generations, and how the world of planning copes or gets ahead of that, with also, am I right in thinking there are companies that are allowing their team members to bid for shifts, or everything's flexible? How do you even, A, is this real? Is this really happening now? And B, what, for people out there that might be quite traditional but want to then maybe attract younger staff members and move into this world, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, shift bidding is definitely coming. It's definitely growing. It's been quite big in America for a number of years. It's definitely on its way over here. It really will suit your sort of Gen Zs and millennials out there, because that ability to be able to hold down 3 or 4 different roles and decide when they're going to work in each particular one on a regular basis definitely seems to work with people's lifestyles these days. And there's less of a burden on loyalty then, because they don't feel that they're being loyal to one company anyway. They're working for 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Now, from a planning perspective, it's about being able to offer, I've heard the term, it's almost micro scheduling. It's being able to offer small pockets of work which are focused and put in at the right time and are attractive to people based on their lifestyle. So that's a challenging thing to do, because obviously the customer is always going to be king, and we want to answer their queries and make sales to them. But being able to offer that interesting array of short shifts, which is of benefit to the agent, is really going to be a key attractant. Especially if we take gig economy and we add remote working into it.
Yeah,
you can work for anybody in the entire world. So it'll be the companies that offer the most flexibility when it comes to those short shifts that are going to be able to pick the cream off the top for the agents that they really want.
and
now,
I guess,
it's interesting. Sorry, it's just
it's
really interesting that when you were talking there about your most productive people being part-timers, because the whole industry does function on part-time work. And it's the other challenge for the planning team there is just making sure that the number of opportunities to get those part-time people offline and get them developed and get them trained to keep them, to keep that productivity high. That's a challenge that people are facing, and that sort of gig economy workforce but being able to plug those gaps to enable you to take those people offline and do that, that will be really, really key for quality going forward, I feel.
That's a really good shout, because again, I think things have to be done differently. If I think back to the part-timers that I'd had in my teams, who most experienced, most productive, best KPIs, but the thing that they would struggle with is new changes, policy changes, product changes, whatever it may be, working around training. They were doing part-time because that fit their lifestyle, right? And then you'd say, right, we've got training in the morning. Well, I don't work in the mornings. Okay, trainers will come. We'll have to speak to the trainers. So you make a really good point, because if that then gets chunked up even more, and the flexibility is even more and very, very fluid, I guess it means how we train people and how we, I see now, for example, that MBAs are being offered in a different way. There's the way that people are learning is different, and we're going to have to reflect that. I was going to say, I've always understood that planning for a successful operation to be successful, planning have a massive role to play in that. But just as we're talking now about bidding for shifts, working with people that have got 4 other companies that they work for, maybe studying as well, the role of planning is going to be even more important going forward.
Yeah, without a doubt. One of the things that the last 18 months, 2 years have proven is that a good planning function can get you through even something that's completely wild as a global pandemic. And hopefully operational managers and senior managers have been able to see that benefit for themselves as well, because we're noticing with companies that we talk to, and very much while I was with the forum talking to member organizations, a lot more of the planning teams are considered to be really, really central to what the business is trying to do, because there's a lot of trying to turn the oil tank around at the moment with these businesses, and they've been as agile as speedboats over the last couple of months, last few months. But it's absolutely vital that they put the planning team right in the middle of things, and they give the planning team the right sort of platform to be able to help to direct the business through all the periods of change that are coming forward.
And one of the things that you mentioned when we were kind of getting together to sort this episode out was actually linked to that, and it was about how going forward, real-time kind of agility, let me get this right, would be more beneficial to businesses than forecast accuracy. What do you mean by that? Because it seems counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? And I think this came out when we were talking to people about the changes that they'd discovered in the pandemic. So when people have been doing forecasting previously, no matter how fancy their forecasting techniques are, what effectively it's all based on is a lot of historical data that they can have a look at year to year, month to month, day to day, so that they can say, well, that's happened with those drivers. These are our drivers now, so this is what we think is going to happen. And by and large, people have been relatively successful with that. Then the pandemic came along and volumes dropped off a cliff. Customer behavior changed entirely and changed regionally when various different elements of lockdown went, when you had the grading system. And suddenly businesses were looking at their historical data models and going, oh my God, I've got nothing. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, never mind in 3 months' time. And when with my experience and my background in intraday automation, it became really, really apparent that the key to success with all of this volatility is being able to flex your workforce at very short notice to be able to handle either peaks or troughs in demand. Give them something to do, make sure that they're really productive, or cancel what people are doing, get them all back online to answer the customer's query. And after looking at it with a lot more, with a bit more of a critical eye, I was looking back at what people's forecasts were like before the pandemic, even with all of these fantastic models. And when it came right down to it, on a day-to-day basis or on an interval-by-interval basis, forecasts were way out. So even with all of that historical data, people weren't forecasting well. And what was really causing the issue was a lack of flexibility in your workforce. So you were expecting 5,000 calls, you got 6,500 calls. It's only 1,500 extra calls, but there's nothing you can do with your workforce because you can't move people in. The manual processes around it are too stodgy and too time consuming for you to be able to flex your resourcing, and customers were suffering as a whole. And it became really apparent that if we reverse the model that we've got at the moment, whereby we do a lot of focusing on making short-term changes, and we push all that effort back into our long-term forecasting and getting our overall basic numbers right, then the business will definitely feel the benefits. So if when you're building a budget and you're saying how many FTE do we need, that's when you need to put all your work in to make sure that when you're saying we need 1,000 FTE, you're roughly right based on those plans. 1,000 FTE needs to be more accurate. And then as you get nearer the day, you can let things like intraday automation tools, no matter which one that you're picking, which one you're signing up to, you can let that take the strain and actually say, okay, well, my forecast variance is actually 20%, but my flexibility in my workforce is 25%. So it doesn't matter. I can still handle all of those volumes, or I can still find useful training time or one-to-one time for people to do, because I've taken all the manual workload out of that, and we can move people just with the snap of a finger. And the businesses who are going to be able to do that, I think, and have their budget right, but then on the day it's a bit of a free-for-all, but we'll make it happen. They're going to be much more successful, because it's that agility to meet, we don't even know when the customer's going to call within a single 15-minute interval. That's what Erlang is for. So if we don't know it down to that granular level, we don't need to schedule people that tightly to a demand that we don't really trust. What we need to do is just have roughly the right number of people in and flex up and down and make the best use of our resource.
I'm sold. I'm sold on real-time agility, because when you think about it, and jump in at any point I'm getting this wrong, but it seems to me the best way of having your workforce set up, the greater the flexibility that this workforce are able to offer, the better, right? Yeah. So that starts with that has ramifications across everything. So how you recruit, who you recruit, what the terms and how they're brought on and what they understand the job to be, how they interact, how they're supported, paid, everything. Such big ramifications. Again, I love it, because the ability to be able to get your workforce to react in the moment to the peaks and troughs of work sounds amazing. Again, though, highlights the importance of the planning team, because it would be, you could bring in people and say, it's a real flexible job. We're going to do a set number, you'll do a set number of hours between these times. We'll give you this much leeway. It's for nothing if you don't have a planning team that's able to coordinate that, to kind of like herd these now wild sheep.
It's more like herding cats. Yeah. But I think you've hit the nail right on the head there. I think that the big thing for me is being able to make those changes quickly and not associated with all that manual work and stodge. Because I think planning teams all over the place will go, I can see we've got a problem at 2 o'clock and I know how to fix it. but it's actually coordinating that and getting the messages out there and getting people to do it and then doing all the updates. That's the pain point. And that's why some businesses will just go, let's just, we'll do what we can, but we don't have a plan to fix that particular service level problem. If you've got that sort of agility to be able to go press a button and things happen, and you can take your 200 people and get them all to do slightly different mixes of things, and suddenly your queues go from 20 people in the queue to 2 people in the queue. The customer experience that comes out of that is just phenomenal. And happy customers are loyal customers, and you don't have to spend any more money recruiting new customers. Everything becomes much more cost effective. These are the businesses that are going to survive and thrive.
And going back to one of your earlier points, just in that example you gave then about someone that identifies that there's a problem at 2 o'clock, if the analysts have been freed up to analyze, it's far more powerful to say, do you know what, we have a problem at 2 o'clock 3 weeks out of 5. All of a sudden then people aren't going to be going, because there is an acceptable level of going, yeah, we can't do anything about it right now.
Yeah.
So however, if your guys, to your point about, it's about people doing the right thing, the things that are going to add the most value, and taking away the administrative stuff that's always the same, then allows them to analyze and build a bigger case, I guess, to say this is more than just a problem at 2 o'clock today.
100%, and it's that analysis, and just think of the value that adds. You go back to your schedulers and you say, actually guys, 3 weeks out of 5 you're causing us an issue with the schedule mix that you're putting together. It's not reflected in the forecast, but it's happening. So can you go away and fix that? Suddenly you're, if not ahead of the curve, you're at least right behind it, aren't you? So you're actually using live information quickly and adeptly to then change the way that you're going to plan for those circumstances in the future. It's absolutely vital. There is, I'm going to stop myself. I was going to say there's no point in having a planning team if you can't do that, but that's not true. But you are seriously stymieing your planning function if you're not giving them the opportunity to actually do what you pay them for, and that's do the analysis.
How have you seen the tools in planning change, technology change in your time?
Well, I'm so old. I remember the days before WFM systems. So when they first came in, you had a lot of naysayers, people who used Excel saying, oh, well, I don't need a system to do this. And there was a bit of resistance. And now it's very rare to find any contact center without a sort of top of the line WFM system. But WFM, that was the last real change until intraday automation came along. So what WFM providers are doing is they're making their algorithms tighter, they're making their front ends more user-friendly. They're adding certain bits on, like shift bidding. For, you can actually bid for a seat on some of them in a building. You name a seat and somebody go, I want to sit there. So they're adding bits and bobs and bells and whistles, and they're much better now. But genuinely, between the arrival of WFMs and intraday automation software, I don't really think there's been a tremendous amount in terms of WFM. And intraday automation is just designed to just take the bits that WFM can't help you with and help you with it, and sort of augment what you're already paying a lot of money for. So that's a big change. I think on the other side of things, there's a lot more about speech analytics, and there's a lot more focus on quality using those speech analytics tools, and that's been really, really good to see. I recently wrote an article, and one of the first lines in it was, contact centers aren't the battery farms of yore, because they did used to just be a factory for pain, didn't they? And now people are beginning to understand that there is actually some benefit in listening to calls, analyzing what, automatically what speech is coming out of those, using that data to inform people about issues that customers are facing. but also being able to book in some time to actually have that quality feedback, so that you can really help to coach people and use your time in your business to sort of make them the best that they can be. So they're really big changes, but and I'm not just saying it because I work for an intraday automation provider, but no matter which solution you're using, it's the biggest step change that you will have seen, unless you've been in contact centers longer than me.
What excites you about the future?
The future is really, really bright, I think. I think we've heard for too many years now about the death of the contact center and the fact that nobody wants to speak to anybody. It's never been true so far, and I don't think it's going to be true going on now, because no matter how many channels you've got, people will still need to talk to somebody. I'm excited by the fact that as we can get more and more mundane things handled through other channels, the actual calls that come through to contact centers are going to be, you know, the really technical ones, the really interesting and difficult and emotive ones. So we've got a real opportunity in the contact center industry to make our little empire, our little world that we work in, a real force for good, a real force for help for people who are actually choosing to call you. I'm excited by, you know, things like the move into asynchronous messaging. Fascinates me at the moment. It just doesn't work for me at all. I need to speak to somebody. I'm old. But, you know, the very fact that you can have an 8-hour conversation with somebody and, you know, both of you have spoken twice, but your problem gets solved when it suits you to actually contact somebody. That's fabulous, but you're still going to need contact center staff to be able to, and to be able to handle the details of that. So I think there's a real opportunity for the scope of what contact centers are doing to continue to grow, or if they have been shrinking, to bounce back and to widen. And I think it's 4% of the workforce in the UK currently works in the contact center.
Yeah,
and see that really growing, especially with hybrid and with all of these other channels available to us.
David Preece from QStory, it's been great to talk to you. Your kind of passion and expertise just shines through. I think I know you'll be open for this, but just to confirm, you're okay for people to get in touch with you and find out more. I'd love to do another one of these, but in the meantime, for people just to get in touch with you, you're okay with that?
100%, yeah. And, you know, get in touch with me about any of your planning concerns. I'm here I'm really happy to help. I'd love to have a talk to as many people as possible.
And never hold it against David that he's a Liverpool fan. You'll see the picture that he took with the cup, the Get Out of Rap cup is in front of his Liverpool Istanbul shirt.
Yeah, that'd be, you see, you as a Tottenham fan, that's the only cup that you'd be photographed with, really, though, isn't it?
Well, I can't. I'm still bitter from a few years ago. We just never showed up in the final. You could have let us win it. You've won it 5 times. Come on. David, thanks very much.
Thank you, Martin. Been a pleasure.
Take care.